Ladies and gentlemen, Death Valley Insider, I'm here with Matt Belinson. Matt, you are a writer for the Ruston Leader. You are the actual beat writer for all the Lincoln Parish sports. So just give everybody a little bit more background of yourself and what it exactly is that you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Yeah, no, I like you said, cover all things Lincoln Parish sports. So that includes Louisiana Tech, Grambling State, and then we've got a couple high schools in this area with Ruston High, Cedar Creek, Lincoln Prep, and Simsboro, Shooter, and a couple other schools. So yeah, keeping busy is never a problem of mine for sure. So happy to join you for sure.
Yeah, so specifically, we made sure we wanted to have you on to talk about Grambling because LSU is coming off of let's just call it for what it is. It was a butt whooping, against Florida State. So with the game against Grambling, I believe I called it a get right game for LSU because let's just be honest, there's going to be two teams on the field this coming weekend, but we all know who's 9 times out of 10, probably 9.5, 9 and 3/4 times out of 10 is going to win this game. But we just wanted to get more insight on the opponent. What do we look for in Grambling State University? Is it more of a pass-based attack? Is it more of a run-based attack? Because from what I could tell, they're more of a pass-based attack offense.
Yeah, it's interesting. Honestly, if you had me on here last year, I would have said it was more of a run-based attack. Grambling was one of only two SWAC teams last year without a 1,000-yard passer. Played a lot of different quarterbacks. Just because there was just so much inconsistency at that position. And I think going into this year, obviously brought in a transfer in Miles Crawley from Alabama State. And I'm sure you had a chance to look through the box score through that Hampton game. I mean, over 300 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's something that has not happened at Grambling in a long time. And as a matter of fact, he's the first, quarterback at Grambling to throw for 300 passing yards since 2018. So it was quite a feat he did against Hampton. So I would say in years past, especially in year one under Hugh Jackson, it was definitely a run-based attack. But I would say going into this year, you knew that the quarterback battle was going to be a storyline throughout fall camp. And obviously Miles has won the job. And I think going forward, obviously that game one kind of gives you an indication that this team wants to throw it around the field. Brings back Lyndon Rash as kind of its leading receiver, an all-conference guy last season. Brought in some transfers that never really got a chance to shine. They brought in a transfer from the SEC at Tennessee. He was a walk-on at Tennessee, never got a chance to play. Brought in a kid from South Alabama, also a walk-on, never got a chance to play. So, Grambling and Hugh Jackson, for a lot of guys, it's kind of a reclamation project, kind of a last chance in a way. Like, this is guys' kind of last shot. And obviously, like you mentioned before, playing against LSU, I think the outcome is pretty much, I think we all know what's going to happen. But I think for a lot of these guys, it's just a matter of, kind of being, prideful against the school that they play for and just saying, hey, you know what, we gave it our best shot. Not many people can say that they played, at Tiger Stadium. So I think for a lot of these guys, that's kind of what they're hoping to get out of it for sure.
Yeah, definitely, because you're not only playing for those school colors, but the name on the back of that jersey, that number that you represent, just you yourself as a person, as a player, it means a lot. And like you said, with these guys, it being a lot of their last chance, to be able to step out on that field, and even if you have a play here or there, you make a big tackle or a third down saving catch, a nice run, or you get a pancake block, or you whip a tackle around the end and cause some pressure on the quarterback, what have you. Just to show up and show out, make a play, make somebody remember who is that kid over there, on the other sideline. Because I was here to watch, Mason Smith or Harold Perkins Jr., what have you, and I end up seeing this other kid like, hey, we need to keep an eye on him. So you spoke a lot about the offense and guys that they're bringing in and whatnot. What can you tell us about this defense that would give this LSU attack fits on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, I would definitely say, it comes down to two guys. And, Brian Kelly kind of mentioned one of them in his press conference Tuesday. Linebacker Lewis Matthews, he comes back for his 5th year, at Grambling. He was an all SWAC player last year, ranked top 10 in the FCS, in tackles. He had a couple sacks as well. Just a tackling machine, really rallies to the ball, sideline to sideline type of player. He's definitely a name I would watch, especially just given, how LSU likes to, again, like most teams now in modern college football, they want to spread you out. They want to get the playmakers, in space. They want them to, do work. And I think for Lewis Matthews, I think this is an opportunity for him, to really show out and showcase that, he can keep up with these SEC athletes. He can tackle them. He can make plays. I think another guy that really has a chance to shine, and like you mentioned before, if he has a couple of tackles for loss, sacks, his name could really shine, and that's Sundiata Anderson. He was the SWAC preseason defensive player of the year. He had 15 and a half tackles for loss last year, 8 sacks. Just on paper, he's really the only true Grambling State defender that really pops, that I think could have an opportunity. If this offensive line, we obviously saw the LSU offensive line challenged, against Florida State. Obviously, that's a different caliber of athlete compared to what Grambling has, top to bottom. But I think Sundiata can definitely fit into that mix. He's 6'5", 250. I mean, he certainly has bulked up to, an SEC caliber, style of player. I think if he has, if he looks into a tackle, if the offensive line kind of slips up in their assignments, if he's able to break through and, can get a couple of tackles for loss. I mean, he's already on, preseason watch list. I've seen him on a couple NFL draft boards as a round 3 type of guy, or day 3 type of guy, excuse me. So I think if he has a chance to shine, I mean, like you said before, a lot of evaluators are going to be there for the LSU guys, but he's definitely a name to keep an eye on. If Grambling is going to keep this thing somewhat respectable, I think he's going to probably have a hand in it.
He was the guy that I was specifically looking at when I looked at, the roster, because the thing that stuck out to me was, like you said, he has prototypical size, 6'5", 250. A lot of teams are looking for those long, lanky, lean, defensive ends, that have that speed and convert that speed to power, like everybody likes to buzzword and talk about. So he was definitely one of the guys that I was looking at when it came to this team. And it kind of led into my next question. Guys that you think could be draft worthy. And I know he was one of them that you just mentioned, a day 3 pick. And day 3, that means that the guy could go anywhere from the 4th to the 7th round. So we're not just talking just end of the day or preferred free agent scraps. Some of these guys are actually have NFL next level talent. Is there anybody else on this team besides Anderson that you think is a draftable talent that people should probably keep an eye on?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, I think probably the only other name that has probably a real opportunity is probably Lewis Matthews. Again, he's been a productive guy, in the SWAC for a number of years. Again, he could have another 100 tackle season in the SWAC. That definitely could raise some eyebrows. I think if you wanted to throw out maybe one other name is, maybe a flyer, depending on the season that he has, if this passing game really takes off. I mentioned him before, wide receiver Lyndon Rash. He comes back after leading this team, in over 500 yards receiving last year, 5 touchdowns. Obviously had a big game to start the year, 90 yards receiving and a touchdown catch against Hampton. So he's easily this team's number 1 receiver. He's the most, proven, producer on the outside. So I feel like if this passing game really starts to develop with Miles Crawley, and, they can kind of become a SWAC contender, and this passing game really relies on him, he certainly could get some looks. I think it's really hard, it seems like every single year the wide receiver class in any given draft class, it's always really deep. There's always, guys with potential. It's really hard to kind of differentiate yourself. And, I think for him, he's obviously put up some decent numbers this past year. I think it kind of comes down to how much this passing game really flourishes before, I can really, solidify him as a draft pick. But I would definitely say Sundiata, I don't want to say he's a lock, but he's about as close to a lock as you can get in a draft pick from this team. And then I would say Lewis Matthews probably on the defensive end. If he definitely can get close to that 100 tackle season again, I would say he's another name to keep an eye on.
Yeah, Lyndon he has that that kind of new wide receiver build where there's wide receivers, they're almost built like running backs. And when you talk about the linebacker, Lewis Matthews, he has that also, that prototypical, like where linebackers now more like safeties almost. They're like, big safeties. They're not really, prototypical linebackers where you're thinking this guy's going to be about 6'2", 240 or so. He's about 5'11", about 220. So you're looking at a guy who's very quick, sideline to sideline speed is very good. He's going to run guys down. He's going to make a sure tackle. So, and again, guys like that can stick out making plays and whatnot and end up getting themselves drafted, getting invited to the combine, different things like that can just help them elevate themselves when it comes next April for next year's draft. Speaking of some of the other things that we look at when we look at a Grambling game, we have to get into it, is the Battle of the Bands. I just want to know, do you think Grambling is going to put on a better show this year than Southern did against LSU's band last year?
Yeah, no, like you mentioned, honestly, for a lot of fans, I've definitely heard from some people that they're honestly, obviously they want to see Grambling play LSU, but for a lot of people, like they want to see like Grambling's band like in Tiger Stadium. Like that's a historic moment for one of the most historic HBCU, if not college football bands. I mean, in the entire country. So, yeah, like you mentioned, the Battle of the Bands after the game, that's going to be definitely a headliner. I would have to say, just based on what I've seen from Grambling, like up close and personal at games, like I've never seen a show like it. They really get the crowd going. Energy is always at 100. So I feel like it would be really hard for them to not top Southern last year. I feel like they're going to do it pretty easily. So, I think Grambling, I definitely think Grambling fans and LSU fans who have never seen, that performance, I would definitely say they need to stick around afterward because you definitely get the energy going. And, even if Grambling, might lose by a couple of touchdowns, I still think Grambling fans are going to stick around and definitely show their support for sure because it's a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, I like growing up in New Orleans, the Bayou Classic with Southern and Grambling, the Battle of the Bands, and it was always a huge deal. So getting to see that band, like you said, perform in Tiger Stadium is going to be really special. It was really special last year to see Southern perform in that stadium. Now to see Grambling perform in that stadium, it's just going to be one of those things where I'll never forget. A friend of mine, he was like, maybe they should have the Bayou Classic in Tiger Stadium. I was like, that's just sacrilege. Like, you
Mm-mm.
can't do that. Like, it would be cool. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, but come on, let's be honest. We can't do the Bayou Classic in Tiger Stadium. It just doesn't fit. I think my dog has something to say about that too. I don't think he likes it either. So we'll just leave it at that. One other thing that I wanted to know, I know a lot of the time some FCS schools will come up and play an FBS school. Uh, let's just be honest. There's always some sort of payout or something like that involved because it makes it worthwhile for the FCS school to take that payout, add it to their athletic budget, and basically take the beating of the FBS school. The FBS school gets to play against somebody where they're going to get a different level of competition. These guys aren't going to quit, but 9 times out of 10, they're probably going to win that game. So, can you speak to the payout, if there was a payout, if you know about the payout, how much was it, and how much will this help Grambling's athletic budget?
Yeah, for starters, there was a payout. This game was, originally contracted in 2020, that before Hugh Jackson got here, and now it's finally here. The payout is $760,000 just to play the game, and then an additional $20,000 is going to the Grambling State Football Foundation. So yeah, close to $800,000 in total to play this game. So obviously a huge buy-in for Grambling. Obviously, like you mentioned, an FCS, budget. That's a massive boost, for an athletic department that really is trying to grow. Again, Hugh Jackson is trying to grow the football program, back into the HBCU power that it was, and you can't do that without resources. And like you mentioned, it's kind of, it's the two-edged sword, for these type of programs of, again, from a morale standpoint, from a competition standpoint, there's definitely a lot of, I think, arguments that are definitely worth having of, is it worth these programs, making, the miles, and the hours long trips, to Tiger Stadium or to these other programs, just to lose by 30 or 40 points. Certainly we have seen FCS teams beat FBS teams before. It's not like it's impossible. But again, there's a reason why these games are scheduled. There's a reason why, again, especially in LSU's case, I think they kind of recognized that Florida State game, if it had gone the wrong way, which it did, I think they definitely recognized that, starting 0-2 on the season, was definitely not going to be an option for them. So I think they recognized when they were making that schedule, like, you know what, like you said, why don't we maybe get kind of a get back game with Grambling? Certainly no disrespect to Grambling. They certainly have great players. But again, like you mentioned before, it's just a different caliber of athlete, a different caliber of training, different level of preparation, when you talk about an LSU. So it definitely is, a worthwhile conversation. I think going forward, depending on, the next 4 or 5 years with all this conference realignment, who knows what teams are going to be playing who anymore. And, who knows if the FCS will even get shots like this. I think for right now, obviously if you're Grambling, I think you'll take, close, the $800,000. And then, like you said, you just keep it moving. And you just hope that, again, some of your guys can show some good tape and that you're able to, come out of there without any injuries and that you're able to show that, Grambling, certainly can look respectable. Obviously, I don't think they're going to win the game, but certainly at least look respectable and say, you know what, this passing game that we showed last week, it looks for real. Like we put up some points, like we can develop this. I think that's really the overall message, that Grambling's going into this one with.
Yeah, I really like the fact that honestly, some people don't like the payout. They don't like the FCS schools coming up taking those games. But like you said, almost $800,000 is going to get infused into Grambling's budget. So why not showcase your band, showcase some of your players. It may not be the ideal outcome in the end, but hey, you get an infusion of cash, you get to showcase your band, showcase your players. And to me, honestly, it gives these kids an experience that they probably would have never gotten before. So it's almost worth it to create the memories for them, even though it may not be the best memories, but hey, you know what? I got to play at Tiger Stadium. I got to see my band perform, or I got to make a play on national TV and the announcers called my name. That's a huge deal for a lot of these kids. And that's something that they'll be able to live on and talk about to their kids and grandkids for years and years to come. Like, hey, I performed at Tiger Stadium. So it's not something that should be taken lightly or just, shaking a fist at or saying, hey, that's not right because it's just a cupcake team. But when they're making the schedule, and like you said, this game was contracted in 2020. However, when you're building your schedule, if you're a college football power and you're coming out the gate with another Power 5 conference matchup, it just so happened to be a top 10 matchup. But when you're making that game years ago, you're like, okay, I'm playing an ACC team, somebody who's a perennial ACC power. I'm going to backdoor and I'm going to play Grambling after that. You want to make sure you kind of pad your schedule. Quite the opposite. Teams like Grambling, when they make their schedules, they're oftentimes left with having to, they're facing like a lot of these top teams and they're getting creamed in the beginning of the year. So having played Hampton and now playing LSU, how is that jump in the level of competition from last week's loss to potentially this week's loss?
Yeah, clearly, just the caliber of athlete. We saw it on display, Sunday night. Just NFL prospects flying around the field. I think it's pretty obvious, and Hugh Jackson talked about it, on Monday again. He didn't really want to get into the payout, model of this game, but he certainly recognized, he said it himself, that it's a different level of resources. It's a different caliber of athlete that you're recruiting to LSU. Again, I think that's why, the Travis Hunters, to Jackson State a couple years ago. That was why it was such a shock. For better or for worse, those caliber of athletes, maybe that's just the byproduct of the system. Those athletes just don't go to the HBCU route. Like it's the SEC, it's the Big 10, it's the Big 12. So frankly, the caliber of athlete that is getting drafted to the NFL is in the SEC. And so I think for Grambling, I think they recognize that certainly they're going to have to game plan, a lot more. I think they recognize that, certainly the physicality that they're going to see, and certainly, the offensive explosiveness that they're going to see, it's definitely going to take a step forward. Grambling and Hampton, they traded punches, and Grambling had a lead for a little bit of time. Hampton had a lead for a little bit of time. So, it's not like Grambling got blown out of the water by any means, but again, certainly if you can't stop the ground game of Hampton, over 270 yards rushing, I find it hard to believe that you're going to be able to stop Jaden Daniels and all of the LSU playmakers if you can't stop Hampton. So again, I think it's just a matter of can Grambling keep it respectable? I was telling my editor, and some other people today. I think if they can honestly make it better than the Southern game last year, I think it was like 65-7 or something like that. If they can keep it within 25-30. I think that's a pretty respectable, outcome. Again, I think a lot of people, like you said, 9.5 times out of 10, I think they recognize that LSU is going to win this matchup. But I think if you're Grambling, as long as you don't get blown out, as long as you don't get shut out, I think you can come away saying, you know what, we've got guys that have shown that, all they need is a stage. They need some time to develop, and they can show out when it matters most.
Yeah, it was a 65-17 LSU win last year. So if Grambling can, keep it under, 6 touchdowns, I think that'll look a lot more respectable. Also, another thing that was kind of weird about that game last year was LSU was up 37-0 at the end of the first quarter. The 17 that Southern scored were they scored a touchdown and they got a touchdown, a field goal in the fourth quarter. So they scored their points towards the end of the game. LSU's pulling guys, and there's tons of other guys that are playing just to try to get those guys some exposure, some playing time, and whatnot. So I think Grambling can do that simply because that they want to attack through the air. We saw the trouble LSU had last week with Florida State. Now, granted, I was talking with Jefferson about how I thought that the height of Florida State's receivers, Coleman being 6'4" and Wilson being 6'7", I thought that really bothered LSU's DBs. You talked about Linden, who's he's more of that Linden Rash. He's more of that Debo Samuel or Treylon Burks type of running back looking type of receiver. Are there any guys in their receiving core for Grambling that you think could give LSU a physical matchup, a mismatch maybe, just similarly to the way the Florida State guys did last week?
Yeah, it's tough to say. Like I mentioned before, a couple of the moves that Grambling made in the offseason, again, they went to the transfer portal, brought some guys in from, the Sun Belt and, from the SEC. But again, they were walk-ons or they never even played in a game. So, certainly in terms of, proven talent, I mean, certainly if they didn't get their chance at those programs, certainly I'd wonder why. But clearly, they wanted a fresh start. But like I mentioned, Linden was really the only wide receiver that I felt like made a true impact. Certainly Antonio Jones. He didn't have a catch last year. 5 for 65 against Hampton, but again, he's 5'9", 175. Not exactly a dominant matchup. Certainly they brought in some guys that I feel like if the right opportunity comes, maybe they could win a one-on-one ball. Again, Nashawn Dickerson, from South Alabama, 6'2", 185. That's certainly a pretty respectable, wide receiver right there, just in terms of the measurables. But again, didn't really have a whole lot of impact in that Hampton game. So, I'm questionable to see if he can make an impact against LSU. But again, if Miles can definitely get the ball out quick, I think that's the game plan for Grambling. It certainly was, against Hampton. They want Miles to kind of be in control of this thing. They don't want him to overthink things. Get the ball out quickly. Let Linden Rash, let CJ Guidry, some other guys, kind of get on the outside and let them do the work for you, as opposed to, again, I think for Miles and this, this offense in general, I think the key for them, and Hugh Jackson talked about this a little bit, is, again, I feel like everyone, like you said, wants to make that big play to be remembered in Tiger Stadium. And I think for Miles, making his second career start for Grambling, I think it's really important for him, if this game wants to be somewhat respectable, that, he can't force anything. Again, his eyes are going to be a little bit bigger with 100,000 people in that stadium, and he may see one-on-one coverage, or but the safety is going to kind of crash in at the last minute. I think he has to be mindful that LSU I think understands that maybe Grambling is going to be off its game a little bit to start. I think their eyes are going to be a little bit bigger. I think they're going to want to be a little bit more aggressive, and I feel like LSU might want to play into that a little bit. And so I think if you're this receiver core, I think you just have to have proven hands. I mean, that was certainly an element of Sunday's game too. Drop passes all over the field. I think if you're Grambling, I think as long as you're moving the chains, if you're taking what the defense gives you, I don't think you need to win those one-on-one matchups, on the outside, because frankly, I don't know how many of those you're really going to get. And so I think as long as you're Miles Crawley in this passing game, I think if you can just take the underneath stuff and then take your third down shots or some stuff over the middle when you really have to, I think that's really the only way you're going to win this. I can't see them going out here and just saying, what, let's just run a bunch of go balls and, let's just try and win this thing. I think they're going to try and be smart and not be so aggressive.
Gotcha. What about the fact that this is going to be Mason Smith's, the heralded defensive tackle for LSU? It's going to be his first game in over a year. Coming off injury, and last week had suspension. One of the most highly touted recruits in LSU in recent history, 6'6", 315-pound defensive lineman. How is it, and how is Coach Jackson and his squad preparing to say, okay, hey, look, this guy is coming out here and he's really got a chip on his shoulder. He's got something to prove after being so highly touted and missing so much time. How are they prepared to try to block Mason Smith, given that he's coming back? It's his first game in over a year. He's coming off of injury and whatnot. So he's only going to play about 30 or so snaps, I believe they said. But on those 30 snaps, how are they prepared to take on the challenge that is going to be Mason Smith?
Yeah, I don't want to dodge the answer, but frankly, it is kind of, we'll have to see. I mean, Grambling lost a couple starters on the offensive line, from last year's team. And again, they brought in some guys from the transfer portal, even wanted to give some freshmen a try in fall camp. So this offensive line, like a lot of the programs right now, it's just kind of in flux. I think a lot of guys are still trying to mesh with each other. Hampton didn't have too much pressure, at least in terms on the stat sheet, only a couple tackles for loss. I think only one sack. So it's not like, Miles Crawley, was being harassed back there. So, certainly game one, you liked what you saw. But again, when you're talking about a caliber of athlete like Mason Smith, who, again, like you mentioned, playing with a chip on his shoulder, which frankly, I think the whole LSU roster is going to be playing with. So I think Grambling recognizes that, LSU is going to come out of the gate fast. They don't want there to be any doubt. They don't want Twitter to start blowing up like, man, these guys can't even, go up, 3 scores on Grambling in the first quarter. Like, what's up with that? Like, so I definitely feel like this offensive line, they're certainly going to prepare for Mason Smith. I think the challenge for them is I really don't think they understand the matchup until they really see it firsthand. You can certainly watch a guy on film. You can certainly see, his tape in high school and things like that. But until he steps on that field and he's with you, I think it's going to be really hard for them to truly prepare. Certainly they're going to double team him. They're going to chip him. Like I mentioned before, I think if you're this Grambling passing attack, with Tony Hull as his offensive coordinator, they want to get the ball out quick. They don't want Miles sitting back there. He certainly can do things with his legs, but again, when you're talking about Mason Smith and other guys on the defensive line, they don't want to mess around and have Miles running for his life back there. So I think pretty much the key is keep it away from Mason Smith, get the ball out quick, run away from him, on those designed runs. And I think that's pretty much the game plan. Again, I don't know if it's going to work, but that's certainly going into the game. That's certainly going to be the mentality.
Yeah, that guy is just, I mean, one of the guys that I comped him to when I was watching some stuff was Chris Jones with the Kansas City Chiefs because he has a similar body build. And just the way that they affect the run and the pass, because there are some guys who are some interior linemen where they're more pass rush oriented, and there are some guys who are just run stuffers. But guys like that, they're a hybrid because they're so big, so strong, so athletic. They can affect the game, whether it's a run or a pass play. One other thing that I tend to look at when I look at schools like Grambling is, are there any game breakers out there? Guys that, like, let's say if it's a defensive back, for example, and he catches a pick six, he may take it the distance. Is there a return guy that may electrify some people with some moves that he may have? A running back or a wide receiver, one of the skill position guys where it's like, hey, if you get this guy the ball in space, watch out. Is there anybody like that outside of Lyndon Rash that we should be paying attention to on this Grambling team?
Yeah, I know I mentioned it before that this is going to be a pass-heavy offense, but I think last year when you looked at this running back room, Floyd Chalk, was the Bayou Classic MVP. He's returning. I think he's kind of part of that two-headed tandem at running back right now. They got Chance Williams, as kind of the main feature back. Certainly Floyd will get his touches, and both of them had a pretty solid game against Hampton. They definitely have shown the ability to hit the home run. If the space is available. Again, I'm not sure, how much they're going to really want to run into this LSU defensive line. So it's going to be interesting to see how many opportunities they get. Again, like I said, maybe they start, give them some screen action. Maybe they want to do some, sprint outs and kind of get them the ball in space and kind of let them, do the work instead of, just running up the gut against this defensive line all the time. So I would definitely say on paper, outside of Linden, those are the guys that, I feel like if you continue to give them the ball, could they break one? Sure. I'm skeptical to see that against an LSU defensive line like this. Definitely another guy, they're really high on their tight ends, right now. Again, they didn't get a whole lot of action in terms of targets and receptions. They brought in a transfer from UCF, who, again, didn't really have a whole lot of action against Hampton. But, again, a physical frame. They certainly talked a lot about him in fall camp. Again, that could be a matchup maybe inside the red zone. Should Grambling get near there, maybe a big third down if they need a conversion. But other than outside of Linden, again, I know, Miles had a pretty solid debut passing, but like I mentioned before, it's really hard to find those game breakers, at least on paper, because like I said, they brought in so many guys that, just didn't do anything at their previous stops. And obviously they're not starting freshmen yet, on the outside. So it's really tough to say outside of Linden, and unfortunately I have a feeling that, LSU is going to really, game plan for him and double team him. So I myself am going to be interested to see who Grambling, leans on in those moments where, we need a third down here to try and score at least once tonight. And I frankly don't know who that game breaker is. again, if Floyd Chalk or Chance Williams can maybe, hit an outside edge, could they pick up a 20-yard gain? For sure. Again, I just find it hard, to see too many of those plays on paper. But I think if you just had to pick some names, who could, break one for a 30-yard gain or something like that, I would definitely pick, those two running backs.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because towards the end of the game last week against Florida State, after the defense had been on the field and they're getting pushed around a little bit, they started giving them more yards. The other defensive tackles that stepped up last week, Jordan Jefferson and a few of those other guys, they really stepped up and they weren't allowing runs up the middle. They weren't letting people just run over them or anything just because Mason Smith wasn't there. So I anticipated it's going to be hard for Grambling to really run the ball. But if someone was to break one, I just wanted to kind of get a feel of who do you think it would be. I figured it would be one of those two running backs, especially Chalk. But I just kind of wanted to get a little bit more of a feel of that there. One final thing we said, you said it earlier that you think that Grambling can do better than what Southern did last year. 65-17 was a 48-point win. Final question. Give me your final score prediction for this game.
Yeah, it's definitely, like I said, I think it could be more respectable than Southern. That being said, I think LSU is going to win comfortably. The score prediction that I sent to Jefferson, I have 56-13. I personally, I feel like you mentioned before, I think it'll kind of be a Southern situation like last year. I think Grambling towards the end of the game will be able to get down towards the red zone and, finally punch one in. Once LSU's, third string, second string, some freshmen are in there. I certainly think LSU is going to win comfortably. I think it'll probably be a similar halftime score, just because, again, I think LSU is going to come out very aggressive. I think they want to shut people up. Again, certainly maybe a win over Grambling won't really shut people up like they want to. But I think just from a player standpoint, I think just getting that sour taste out of your mouth from Sunday and just frankly dominating an opponent and showing your athleticism, showing your skills. I think Brian Kelly and this team really recognizes that they need to kind of get that confidence back. And I think they're going to really just come out guns blazing. So I anticipate LSU winning comfortably in this one. But again, I think, if you're Grambling, you can kind of have some internal bragging rights and say, you know what, we got blown out, but at least not as bad as Southern.
Exactly. Yeah. I honestly, I was kind of thinking along those same lines because I haven't turned in my official pick yet for the website, but I'm kind of leaning like 55-13, 55-17, something like that. And I actually think, honestly, that Grambling may catch them off guard early with a play, may break one and get in field goal range and be able to kick a field goal or something early. And then maybe get a couple of late scores, like you said, when it's kind of garbage time and they're taking people out and just trying to let guys get some physical time on the field. But Matt, I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you talking Grambling. It's very insightful. Let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, I still call it Twitter, so you can follow me on Twitter at Belinson Matt, just my last name and then my first name. And you can also follow all my coverage, at rustonleader.com. Certainly do our best to, like you said, a lot of Lincoln Parish sports to cover, but I certainly, try to do my best to give, each school, a fair amount of coverage, and certainly love doing stuff like this. Obviously, like we mentioned before, I think we know kind of what the matchup is going to be, but for a school like Grambling, this is a big weekend for them just in terms of the opportunity that they get. So definitely appreciate you having me on.
No, man, anytime, man. I really appreciate it. And I know like the sports that you guys cover up there in North Louisiana, like growing up in South Louisiana where I'm from, like we always kind of paid attention to everybody up the north there because they were like, oh, they think they're so good. They think they're so what are they doing up there? So it's always this kind of North Louisiana, South Louisiana thing that they got going on. So this weekend will be the matchup of the Tigers from North Louisiana playing the Tigers of South Louisiana. So should be a good matchup. Like we said, we're going to expect LSU to win. It's just by how much, and does anybody from Grambling make any exciting plays or anything like that? Matt, really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, man. So we'll catch up to you next time.
Yeah, thanks again.
All right.